Hello, and welcome to Taking Control of Your Diabetes. Today we're talking about traveling with diabetes. And with us, we have Adam Levbarg. Adam has type 1 diabetes and has traveled to many different regions of the world, including Europe, the Middle East, and Asia. Adam, welcome to the show today.
Thanks for having me on.
Well, let's start off. What got you interested in traveling in the first place?
You know, travel was always something that I had an interest in. In high school, when I was 15 years old, we took a 10-day trip to France in our French club, and I loved it. And I always wanted to go traveling some more, but to me, traveling was always something that you did when you were older, when you were retired. I think that's a pretty common perception in the United States. I was always more interested in learning about the cultures and the people, and the attitude towards travel is really more towards comfort and luxury than it is about learning about the places that you're visiting. And so I didn't have a lot of money at the time, so I was looking for ways to stretch my dollar. I wound up taking a 3-month trip. I found all of these discount airlines. This was in 2001. And so I basically planned my trip based on where I could get a $20 ticket. I flew from LA to London. From London, I flew to Hamburg, Germany, into the Netherlands, down to Brussels, flew from Brussels into Barcelona, and then flew to Milan in Italy and spent some time going through northern Italy on the coast and into Venice, and then flew back to London.
I mean, that sounds like the trip of a lifetime for most people. And I think what's most impressive to me, and we were talking before the show, is that you did it on a fairly low budget. And I think that's an important point for our viewers today, that if you investigate and you research, you can go to some pretty exotic places without spending your whole bank account. Mm-hmm. Now, in your traveling, how has it changed your life, both professionally and personally? Because I know that since your first trip, you've been doing a lot of trips.
I think my mom probably thought that, well, once you did this, you satisfied this crazy wild hair that you've got, and now you could get back to your ordinary life. What wound up happening was it really just sparked my travel bug, and I wanted to continue doing it. It didn't satisfy the passion. In fact, it made me realize how small a portion of the world I had actually seen, and I wanted to see more. And I was investigating alternate ways of stretching my dollar. There are these hospitality exchanges, hospitalityclub.org, globalfreeloaders.com, and couchsurfing.net, I believe.
Now, was that where you met your wife on one of these trips?
It's true.
Because that's changed your life personally.
It's changed my life dramatically. These hospitality exchanges are databases of people that love to travel all over the world. And when you're traveling to a new place, you can access the website, local people who live in the area, and they can show you around, take you out to eat, show you some local spots, little, beaches, whatever the case may be. And I had traveled this way for several years.
Let me just jump in there and say that, a lot of people, when they go to a trip, they get out they call the concierge desk, what should I do today? And I think they don't really experience the culture, the people, as much as you have, really assimilating within society more than just going to little tourist spots,
I really like the Rick Steves, the travel guide, his philosophy, which is that the more money you pay, the more of a barrier you're putting up between yourself and the culture that you've left your country to meet. It's not authentic. And when you're staying in people's homes, you're meeting people that want to meet you.
Well, Adam, if someone's planning a trip internationally, what are some of the general precautions people need to think about before they go?
You need to know, of course, where you're going and prepare for that country specifically, or those countries specifically. Because obviously if you're traveling to a developed, industrialized first world country, Western Europe or Australia, your precautions are going to be considerably different than if you're traveling to some of the third world countries that I've been to in Southeast Asia. Simply availability of medication is important to know. I mean, you can always call the pharmaceutical manufacturers to ask them whether or not your medications are available in the countries that you'll be traveling to. It's important also to a less developed area, you would need to check with a travel clinic. There are travel doctor clinics. Generally, they're not covered by insurance, but they're absolutely necessary. A qualified travel doctor can give you a detailed information about the regions that you're visiting, diseases that are problematic in that area, they can administer the vaccines or the immunizations, rather.
I think that's pretty important because the information changes all the time. Mm-hmm. They have malaria that's resistant to certain types of therapy.
Different strains. The strains are always changing. And a malaria medication that can help prevent malaria in one region may not be effective for a malaria strain in other regions.
Well, you know what? In preparing for the show, I just went to our own university, directory, and we have a travel clinic, and there are infectious disease and physicians who specialize in taking care of people before preparing, and of course after, when you come back, with worms coming out of every every part of your body. Yeah. In the States, it's quite different. I think my recommendations for people that do domestic travel, and I do a lot of domestic travel, is basically you have to just make sure that if you leave your prescriptions, you lose your prescriptions, that you have them. And one thing I found out is that if you get your prescriptions from a national pharmacy chain, that you can go to any of the pharmacies around the country and they'll give you a 3-day supply until you get back home or until you contact your doctor. So I think that's the main thing about domestic. And it sounds to me from what you said, the more exotic place you go to, the more information you need to find, and you might even need to see a specialist for sure.
Those are all good suggestions. I always like to encourage people to do business with local pharmacies too, but in certain situations like this, the national pharmacies definitely do have an advantage, and it's a very good alternative to have as an emergency backup.
Well, it's a good topic to go into our next issue, which is packing. If you pack correctly, you carry your stuff with you with some of the tips we'll talk about, then you would not ever be in that situation. What are some of the general tips you have for people when they're getting their suitcase and they're shoving everything in to try to get it on this trip? What would you tell them?
What I do is I have both my wife and I travel with packs. There's a great company called Osprey. Osprey makes these travel packs, which are very different from camping backpacks. These are travel packs that fold together in really ingenious ways to maximize your space, have lots of protections to fold over flaps that cover zippers to prevent people from slashing your bags and things like that. It's definitely for urban backpacking as opposed to backpacking outdoors. I recommend that if you can support, if you're strong enough to wear one of these travel packs, they're a great investment.
Well, the second best scenario I think for me would be one of these small suitcases that fits in the overhead that has a good roller, so sure. That it's easy maneuverability. Mm-hmm. Because not everybody, is large and strapping as you are. Yeah.
A lot of these travel packs do also have smaller zip-off pouches. So you can actually zip off a day pack and leave the main backpack in your hotel or wherever it may be.
Where do you put your insulin, and how do you deal with heat? Because your suitcase may be transported in a hot location or something.
That's very important. Temperature, insulin and Symlin also very temperature sensitive, and this is where a little bit of planning can go a long way. My wife and I, she was my girlfriend at the time, but when we went on a 7-month backpacking trip through Southeast Asia, China, and Korea, and we were traveling in Thailand in the hottest part of the summer. And one of the things that I noticed, I wear an insulin pump, and we were in the middle of the 110, 120 degree humidity. It was really, really awful in this outdoor market. And one thing that I noticed was that my blood sugar went up to over 300 in the middle of the day, and I realized it was because the heat had cooked my insulin. Thankfully, I had managed to research a little ahead of time. I got these Freo pouches, they're called, which are these crystals. You see them commonly sometimes as cooling sweatbands and things like that. Sure. They're filled with crystals. You submerge them in water, and the crystals swell up into an insulating gel. And you can put your insulin inside, or they have models that fit insulin pumps as well. Put it on your belt, and without any kind of refrigeration, the evaporation of the water off the gel maintains a constant temperature inside the pouch. That was a lifesaver. If I hadn't done that small amount of planning, our trip would have been over before it began.
So the bottom line is you got to make sure that if you're on insulin or any medication that needs to stay cool, you got to pack it correctly and get some insulation once you get there. When I went to Thailand, I bought a stainless steel, very small thermos. Mm-hmm. So if I dropped the thermos, it wouldn't break, and that kept my insulin cool. Yeah. So it wouldn't go bad.
And certainly for other people who may not want to be as mobile, who are going from a hotel to seeing some sights, you have a refrigerator in your room, you can bring a little freezer pack that'll last you for the day. That may work for some people. For if you've got a more mobile trip than these, then it's basically whatever works best for you in that situation.
Well, earlier this morning, I showed the TCOID filming crew what it takes for me to get ready for a trip. Let's take a look. All right, I'm getting ready for my trip. This is the suitcase I always use. It's small, it fits in the overhead, and I don't have to check it in, and I'm in and out of airports pretty quickly. Now, in this suitcase, I have my compartments, which I fill with really important stuff that I need for my diabetes trips. First of all, my pills. I take blood pressure and cholesterol medications. I always have a couple days extra in case my flight gets delayed or canceled, and I even label them, PM dose versus AM dose. That's really important. Second is an extra glucose sensor. I wear a continuous glucose monitor. It tells me my blood sugar every 5 minutes, the topic of a previous show. And these things are fantastic for traveling, especially internationally. But nonetheless, I'd never want to be without my continuous glucose monitor. Then in the back, you always got to have snacks in case you get low in the middle of the night. This is a power bar, and my favorite, SpongeBob SquarePants, 80 calories, no cholesterol, fast-acting little gummy bear type of candies. Now, you got to have your chargers, one for the cell phone, but the other one, very importantly, charges the battery in my continuous glucose monitor. Now, in this pocket down below, we got really important stuff. I wear an insulin pump. I wear the disposable Omnipod, and these are extra pods that I put on. And of course, this is where I usually keep it. Also, a topic of one of our previous TCOID shows. And then we have an extra glucose meter with strips. That's important because if you lose the meter you're actually using all the time, you can't test your blood sugar, you can't calibrate your continuous glucose monitor. Now, if your pumps go down, you always have to have an extra bottle of insulin with a syringe. And if you have a pen, you can carry that as well because it makes life a little bit easier. But the bottom line is, if you're on insulin, you need to have extra insulin. And I think we're getting near the end. Of course, you need the old traditional earplugs because if you have loud neighbors, you're not going to be getting any sleep on your trip. So there's my stuff, and I don't go anywhere without it. Basically, you need to make a checklist and use a system that works for you. Now, what about a letter stating your medical conditions from your physician? What do you recommend for international? I know in domestic, you don't really need it these days.
It's very, very important when you travel internationally because you may be traveling in countries where the therapy that you're taking in the United States may not be available. It may not be nearly as common. I know in a lot of countries, insulin pumps aren't covered. So there may be a question as to what it is you've actually got strapped to your gut. So it's very important to have a letter from your doctor outlining your illnesses and the medications that you're on. Prescriptions may be of limited value because they may not know, internationally, the security guards at airports or checkpoints may not know what they're looking at. So if you can possibly do it, I would definitely recommend getting a translation of the letter in the local language, or at least, at the very minimum, get the word diabetes translated, know how to say it, have it written down in the local language.
I see.
Insulin, even just a couple of words like that, not only will it give you the opportunity, if you learn how to say these things, it'll give you the opportunity to interact with local people and give you some sense of the language. It's very important, I feel, when you travel to try to engage people in their local customs and their local language anyway. So this is sort of just an extension of that.
My suggestion is, everyone's so busy these days, including our doctors, is to write out the letter for the doctor and they can put it on their stationery. And also make sure you mention the devices, the glucose tester, the continuous glucose monitor, the insulin pump. And I got my story to tell. I wear this little disposable insulin pump called the Omnipod. I usually keep it on my arm, which is right here. This is an old one. And when I was in Egypt, for some reason, the security bell went off. So when they searched me, they're patting me down. They see this little plastic device taped to my body with batteries and looks like could be a fuse, Mm-hmm. So luckily, I had my letter translated by a friend in Arabic. And it also helped. I was traveling with an Egyptian doctor, but if I didn't have that letter or someone that really spoke the language, it would have been pretty serious.
That happened to me actually in Taipei airport, where they say, there's actually a sign that says drug trafficking is punishable by death, right in the airport. They started to examine at the security checkpoint at the airport, started to examine my insulin supplies, and I showed them my letter. Thankfully, which was in English, by the way, not in Chinese. Thankfully, I had my wife with me as my translator. So it was okay. But it's those sort of situations those potential problems that I could have had that I'm trying to share with people so that it won't happen to them.
When I go through security now, I do everything in my power not to have that little light beep, because that creates a whole situation where they take you aside, they search you, they look through your bags. So I actually take off every bit of metal, including my watch. If on my pump with a belt strap, the pump I leave on, but I take off the holder for it, because sometimes those metal clips will alarm. I make sure none of those gum wrappers are in my pocket, and I make sure that I comply with the regulations of anything, everything's less than 3 ounces, and I put it in that separate bag. So the overall recommendation that I give is not to get searched, because then it creates, what are these syringes and all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, it's very important to check the TSA's website, tsa.gov, I believe is what it is, to find out which personal hygiene product is banned this week.
It's important. If you don't travel a lot, it's a good site, because it's things change, and if you don't know, it just creates delays at the airport.
Yes, yeah, and it's good advice.
Well, what about insurance? I know that you should find out about your own health insurance, but can you purchase insurance, for example?
It's very important to know that what your health insurance will cover and doesn't cover when you're abroad. Sadly, if you've got an HMO, you're probably out of luck unless you really have an emergency situation. It's actually all the more reason why you should have a travel insurance policy, because a travel insurance policy, if you have an HMO, will cover your medical doctor expenses abroad. If you're lucky enough to have PPO insurance, generally there's a catalog of network doctors in foreign countries. I know when I go to Taiwan, there's 5 or 6 different doctors in the area where my wife is from that we could go see on our health insurance if we needed to.
So the bottom line is get out your health card, look at the back, call customer service.
Yeah, and generally they have an international department that can help you. You may need to pay for international expenses out of pocket, depending on what kind of coverage you have, but you'll get reimbursed at the end if you follow all the rules.
I was reading in a chapter that you wrote about travel that if you don't experience the local food, then it's not worth going. And what do you do? Are you worried? I'm worried about getting some bug where I'm going to be, throwing up all night or something worse than that.
As I said, my wife and I, we traveled all over Southeast Asia and China and Korea for 7 months. We ate local food everywhere we went. In fact, we specifically avoided, whenever we could, American food, KFC. We really ate local food almost all the time that we were there. If you're at a place that has a lot of customers, generally in Southeast Asia in particular, they're cooking the food right in front there's no kitchen in the back. They're cooking everything right in front where everybody can see. Then go for it by all means. You're not going to get sick. You should of course always have your vaccinations, your typhoid and your hepatitis vaccines and all of that, which you should have taken care of before the trip. But then by all means, take part in the local cuisine. It's one of the greatest joys of international travel.
Yeah, and I like that, because otherwise you're sitting in some hotel eating some American food, and of course drinking bottled water or boiled water is just common sense.
And you're paying 10 times the price, and you're again putting up a barrier between you and the culture that you spent so much time and effort to come visit.
Now, you've mentioned that traveling has helped you learn things about your own diabetes that you otherwise would not have.
Oh, absolutely.
Tell us about that.
When you take yourself out of your everyday life and put yourself into a completely foreign experience, you now have a different perspective on your diabetes and how your body reacts to certain kinds of foods and how your body reacts with increased exercise or decreased exercise. And it's in that way that you're able to use your experience at home as a baseline, kind of like a control group in a clinical trial, where you have this baseline, how your body reacts in this given situation. Well, now that you're out traveling, you're walking around more, you're eating different foods, you're more active, you're less active. You can use that information and how your body behaves and how your blood sugars behave, and use that information when you come back home. Rather than seeing it as a barrier that would impede your travel, use it as a learning experience because there's valuable information that can be gleaned from international travel.
Yeah, and my doctor-ish suggestion would be, hey, bring your glucose meter. It's your best friend on this trip because you're doing things that you wouldn't normally do. Now, when I pick up a travel book, it never says, you know, if you have diabetes, look out for this, look out for that. Where do people get information about traveling with diabetes?
The way that I learned is really just by my own experience. I picked information from, you know, all over the internet. I managed to meet up on, again, you know, the Lonely Planet forums. I managed to meet up with a diabetic traveler in Great Britain who lives in London, I believe, and he's the one who told me about those Frio cooling pouches, which, you know, saved my trip. I don't know what I would have done if I hadn't found out about those.
Adam, tell us about one of your medical emergencies during your travels.
We were in Thailand and on the beach, and we were watching some parasailers. We thought it sounded like fun. I do wear an insulin pump, and which is supposed to be waterproof. But nonetheless, I talked with the guys who were running the boats and asked them if it's a dry landing or a wet landing, and they said dry landing, dry landing.
Yeah, you usually take off and land on a dock.
A
floating dock,
a deck on the back of the boat. Well, not in Thailand. In Thailand, they strap you up to a parachute while standing on the beach, and then the boat flies off out to the horizon, and before you know it, you're being pulled up into the air. And it was a magnificent view, and an experience I would never trade in, even considering what happened to me, which is that there was no dry landing.
They missed the beach.
They completely missed the beach. There was no effort to even have me land on the beach. I fell down in the water. I realized very quickly that my pump had hit the water. I reached in my pocket and pulled it out so it was above the surface, but when I got back onto the beach, I saw that the pump was totally dead.
Wow. Well, my friend Bill King travels with diabetes. He's had diabetes a long time. Let's hear one of his traveling with diabetes stories.
I was traveling from Philadelphia to San Francisco to give a presentation. I had to catch an earlier flight to make the meeting on time, so I kind of rushed out of the house, not packing as effectively. As I was going through security, I realized I didn't have my pump. I immediately called a friend in Chicago and could meet me at the airport, and he said he'll be there. So when I landed in Chicago, he was stuck in traffic. So now I'm on the next leg going from Chicago to San Francisco, and you're like 3 hours now. My blood sugar just kept climbing and climbing. So I was drinking water, not eating any of the pretzels, try to just walk up and down the aisle, but just take it easy. And then I was trying to think of a way I could maybe turn off the production of sugar, and I know alcohol has that effect, so I ordered a vodka. But as time went on, my sugar just continued to climb, and I started feeling nauseous. And I went to the restroom, but I recovered. Went back, I thought I could fall asleep, and that would be it. But again, I got a wave of nausea. Went to the restroom was occupied. So I went right to the back of the plane thinking there was another restroom there, and that was the galley. And there were 3 flight attendants in the galley, and they looked at me like, "Can I help you?" And I started to talk, I vomited. So they were screaming and saying, "What's wrong with you?" And I said I had diabetes. They said, "Do you need juice?" And I said, "No, I need insulin." They made an announcement on the airplane. If anybody had insulin, come forward, and 2 people came forward with insulin. I was able to get myself back under control rather quickly. And when I landed, my blood sugar was 174, and I had a pump waiting for me, and within an hour I was in front of a group of 30 people from the endocrinology division at University of San Francisco.
Well, I don't recommend drinking alcohol to keep your blood sugars down. I would say to you, Bill, listen, we all can forget important things like insulin, but every person with diabetes who takes insulin at least should carry an emergency insulin pen or a little packet with you that carries glucose tabs in case you get low on the airplane, your glucose tester, and anything else that you really need. And of course, at your connecting flight, you should have gotten off the plane and went and got insulin. It's a lot more important than letting your health go downhill over the second part of your flight. What did you do when you lost your insulin pump?
Thankfully, this is where planning ahead really paid off. I had some Lantus and some bottled Humalog and some insulin syringes as an emergency backup. Thankfully, the pump manufacturer was able to FedEx me a new insulin pump. So within a week, I was back to pumping again, and we were able to continue with our trip.
You were prepared.
I was prepared.
There's so much stuff to talk about travel, but I'd like to ask you, sort of getting near the end of the show, what would you say to someone who was hesitant to travel and see the world because they're afraid because they have diabetes.
Travel is a matter of priority and how much priority you put on travel in your life. Because if you make travel an important part of who you are, an important part of your personality and what you have to contribute to the world, then you find ways to do it. You find ways to learn about the world and other cultures and integrate it into your own life and share those perspectives with your friends and hopefully make the world a slightly smaller place.
Adam, thanks so much for sharing all of your travel experiences with us today.
Of course.
We'd also like to thank our sponsors for supporting Taking Control of Your Diabetes television. It's their support that makes these programs possible. If you have any questions or comments, please email me at askdre@tcoid.org. Be sure to check out our website, tcoid.org, for more information on tips for traveling with diabetes and to see if a TCOID conference and health fair is coming to a city near you. So remember, you have the main responsibility for taking control of your diabetes. You are your own best advocate. Be smart and be persistent. So goodbye for now, and until next time, take control of your diabetes. You owe it to yourself and your family. I always love when my patients come in and show me their logbooks with no entries for 2 weeks. I ask what happened, and they reply, I was on vacation. Don't forget, you can't leave your diabetes at home. You have to be prepared. Think through what you'll need while you're gone, and test more often when you're on vacation. As a person with diabetes who's been traveling for decades, I can honestly say, don't let diabetes get in the way of having a successful trip. Be prepared, and most importantly, have fun.